I was standing in my backyard in Scottsdale, Arizona, staring at the property line when my neighbor's wife, Patricia Rivers, marched across her lawn like she was leading a military parade. Her face was already turning that particular shade of red that told me I was about to have another conversation I didn't want to have. It was barely 9 in the morning on a Saturday, and I had just finished marking out where my new fence would go. "Excuse me, Xavier, but what exactly do you think you're doing?" Patricia demanded, her hands planted firmly on her hips. She was wearing a crisp white polo shirt with the Xavier Heights HOA logo embroidered on it, khaki capris, and tennis shoes so white they practically glowed in the Arizona sun. I straightened up from where I had been hammering in the last wooden stake and wiped the sweat off my forehead. "Morning, Patricia. I'm marking out where my fence is going to go. Should be up by the end of next week." Her eyes widened like I had just told her I was planning to build a nuclear reactor in my backyard. "A fence? You cannot just put up a fence without HOA approval. Did you even read the covenant agreements when you bought your house?" "I did read them," I said, keeping my voice level. "And I submitted my fence application 3 months ago. Never heard back, so according to Section 12.4 of the HOA bylaws, if you don't respond within 60 days, it's automatically approved." Patricia's mouth opened and closed a few times. "That is absolutely not how it works. You need explicit written approval from the board. And furthermore, that fence line you've marked out is completely wrong. You're encroaching on community property by at least 3 feet. I felt my jaw tighten. This was exactly what I had been afraid of. Patricia had been the president of the Xavier Heights Homeowners Association for the past 6 years, and in that time, she had made it her personal mission to control every single aspect of the neighborhood. From mailbox colors to the exact shade of beige you could paint your house, Patricia had an opinion on everything, and she expected everyone to follow her rules to the letter. "Patricia, I had a surveyor come out last month. That's the actual property line. I own this land fair and square." "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "The community property extends all the way to that mesquite tree over there. Everyone knows that." "Everyone is wrong," I said flatly. "My deed says otherwise and the survey confirms it. Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm just putting up a fence on my own property." Patricia pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. "We'll just see about that. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tonight, and don't you dare start any construction until this is resolved." She stormed off before I could respond, her white tennis shoes kicking up small clouds of dust as she crossed back to her property. I stood there for a moment, looking at the stakes I had carefully placed along the surveyed property line. Every single one of them was exactly where they needed to be. I had the documentation to prove it. My wife, Emily, came out the back door carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. "Let me guess," she said, handing me one. "Patricia, how did you know?" I could hear her from inside. "The windows are closed and the air conditioning is running." Emily shook her head. "What's her problem this time? She says my fence line is wrong and that I'm building on community property." Emily raised an eyebrow. "But we had that survey done. You paid almost $2,000 to make sure everything was perfect." "I know. And the survey shows that the actual property line is 3 feet further than where everyone thinks it is. Apparently, at some point in the past, someone made an assumption, and it just became accepted as fact. So what are you going to do?" I took a long drink of the iced tea, savoring the cold sweetness. "I'm going to build my fence exactly where it's supposed to go. I have the legal documents. Patricia can throw all the HOA meetings she wants." That evening, I received an email from Patricia demanding my presence at an emergency board meeting the following day, Sunday afternoon, at the community center. The email was written in all capital letters and included several references to legal action, fines, and the importance of community standards. I forwarded it to my lawyer, Marcus, just to have him on standby. Sunday afternoon arrived with the kind of heat that makes you wonder why anyone decided to build cities in the Arizona desert. I drove the 3 blocks to the community center, which was really just a glorified clubhouse next to the neighborhood pool. Inside, the air conditioning was struggling against the heat, and 5 board members sat behind a folding table looking like they were about to judge me for crimes against humanity. Patricia sat in the middle, flanked by her Vice President Karen Daniels on one side and Treasurer Sandra Mitchell on the other. 2 other board members, whose names I could never remember, sat on the ends looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Xavier, thank you for joining us," Patricia said in a tone that suggested she wasn't thankful at all. "We're here to discuss your flagrant violation of HOA regulations regarding your proposed fence." I sat down in one of the metal folding chairs facing the table. There were about a dozen other neighbors scattered around the room, clearly there for the entertainment value. "I haven't violated anything. I submitted my application months ago. An application that was clearly deficient and required additional information," Patricia shot back. "We sent you a letter requesting clarification." "I never received any letter. That's not our problem. The burden of communication is on the homeowner." I pulled out my phone and opened my email. "I have confirmation that my application was received on March 15th. It's now June 20th. That's over 90 days. According to your own bylaws, my application is automatically approved." Karen Daniels leaned forward. She was a thin woman with short blonde hair and the kind of pinched expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant at all times. "The bylaws also state that any construction must conform to existing neighborhood standards and cannot encroach on community property." "My fence doesn't encroach on anything. It's on my property line." "The property line you claim," Patricia said, emphasizing the word claim like it was something dirty. "However, the community has maintained that green space for over 20 years. It's clearly community property." I reached into my folder and pulled out the survey documents. "This is a professional survey conducted by Arizona Land Surveying, a licensed and bonded company. It shows the exact legal boundaries of my property based on the deed filed with Maricopa County. The property line is exactly where I marked it." I walked up and placed the documents on the table in front of Patricia. She barely glanced at them. "Surveys can be wrong," she said dismissively. "We'll need to conduct our own survey to verify." "Feel free," I said, "but I'm not waiting for you to do that. My fence goes up starting tomorrow." The room erupted in murmurs. Patricia's face went from red to almost purple. "If you proceed with this construction, we will have no choice but to take legal action. We will also fine you $500 per day for every day the fence remains standing on community property." "You can try," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was pounding. "But you'll lose. I have the legal documents proving that's my land." "This meeting is over," Patricia announced, standing up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the linoleum floor. "Mr. Xavier, you've been warned. Any construction will be considered a violation, and we will pursue all available remedies." I walked out of the community center into the blazing afternoon sun, my shirt already sticking to my back. A few neighbors caught up with me in the parking lot. One of them, an older man named George who lived 2 streets over, clapped me on the shoulder. "Good for you standing up to her," he said quietly. "Patricia's been running this neighborhood like her personal kingdom for too long." "I'm just trying to put up a fence," I said. It's never just about the fence with the HOA, George replied. It's about control. You be careful, though. Patricia doesn't like losing. Monday morning arrived, and right at 7 o'clock, the fence company pulled up in front of my house. 3 trucks, 6 workers, and enough materials to build a 6-foot privacy fence along the entire back property line. I met the foreman, a weathered guy named Bill who had been in the fencing business for 30 years. Got your permits all sorted? Bill asked, looking over the plans. Yep. City permits are all approved. HOA is throwing a fit, but legally I'm in the clear. Bill nodded knowingly. HOAs are always the worst part of any job. Had one in temp last year that tried to make us tear down a fence 3 times because the stain color was half a shade too dark. You sure you want to go ahead with this? Positive. The property line is exactly where I showed you. Let's get it done. The crew got to work, and by 8:30 they had already dug the first dozen post holes along the surveyed line. I was inside grabbing some water for the crew when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the front window, I saw Patricia marching toward the backyard with Karen right behind her. I headed out to intercept them. Stop this immediately, Patricia demanded, pointing at the fence crew. You do not have approval for this construction. I have all the approval I need, I said. City permits are posted on the fence there. Everything is legal. You're building on community property. Bill walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. Madam, we're building exactly on the property line as indicated by the survey. If you have a dispute about the property line, that's between you and the homeowner, but we have our instructions and proper permits. Patricia turned her attention to Bill. If you continue with this construction, the HOA will hold you personally liable for any damages or removal costs. Bill just shrugged. Lady, I've been doing this long enough to know that's not how it works. We have a contract with the homeowner and proper permits from the city. What the HOA thinks doesn't really matter to me. I could see Patricia's hands trembling with rage. Karen put a hand on her arm, whispering something, but Patricia shook her off. Fine. If you won't stop, then I'll make you stop. She pulled out her phone and dialed. I heard her clearly say, Yes, I need police at 4782 Desert Willow Drive. There's an illegal construction project happening, and the homeowner is refusing to stop despite HOA regulations. My stomach dropped. She actually called the cops. I looked at Bill, who just rolled his eyes. Not the first time, he said. Won't be the last. 20 minutes later, 2 Scottsdale police officers showed up. Patricia immediately rushed over to them, gesturing wildly at the fence construction and talking rapid fire about HOA violations, community property, and illegal encroachment. The officers, to their credit, listened patiently and then walked over to where I was standing with Bill. Sir, are you the homeowner? The older officer asked. His nameplate read Martinez. Yes, officer, Ethan Xavier, this is my property. We got a call about illegal construction. Can you explain what's going on? I handed him the folder I had prepared, which included my deed, the professional survey, the city permits, and my HOA application with the certified mail receipt. I'm building a fence on my property line. The HOA president disagrees with where the property line is, but as you can see from the survey, this is the legal boundary. Officer Martinez looked through the documents carefully while his partner, Officer Chen, examined the actual fence line and the survey stakes. After a few minutes, Martinez handed the folder back to me. Everything looks in order here. You have proper city permits and the survey appears legitimate. This seems like a civil matter between you and your HOA. But he's building on community property. Patricia interjected, pushing her way into the conversation. Madam, do you have documentation showing that this land belongs to the HOA? Officer Chen asked. Everyone knows it does. It's always been community property. We maintain it, we water it, we've treated it as community space for over 20 years. Officer Martinez shook his head. That's not really how property ownership works. If his deed and survey show this is his property, then it's his property, regardless of who's been maintaining it. You'd need to show us a deed or some legal document proving otherwise. This is outrageous, Patricia sputtered. You're just going to let him steal community property. We're not going to stop a homeowner from building on their own land with proper permits, Martinez said firmly. If you believe there's a property dispute, you'll need to handle that through civil court, not by calling the police. Now, is there anything else we can help you with today? Patricia looked like she was about to explode, but Karen grabbed her arm and started pulling her away. Come on, Patricia. We'll handle this through the proper channels. After the officers left and Patricia and Karen drove away, Bill whistled low. That lady is something else. You sure you want to stay living in this neighborhood? My wife loves the house, I said. And I'm not about to let some power-hungry HOA president push me around. Fair enough. Let's get this fence finished. Over the next 3 days, the fence went up beautifully. 6 feet of solid cedar privacy fencing stained a nice natural tone that complemented the desert landscape. It ran along the entire back property line, exactly where the survey indicated it should be. The crew did excellent work, and by Thursday afternoon, they were packing up their equipment. On Friday morning, I woke up to find an official-looking letter from the HOA taped to my front door. It was a notice of violation and fine, informing me that I had erected an unpermitted structure on community property, and that I was being fined $500 per day starting immediately. The letter also stated that I had 15 days to remove the fence or face additional legal action. I called Marcus, my lawyer, and read him the letter over the phone. Well, they're certainly escalating, Marcus said dryly, but they don't have a leg to stand on. Your survey is rock solid and you have all the proper permits. Send me a copy of that letter. I'll draft a response. What kind of response? The kind that politely but firmly tells them to back off or face a countersuit for harassment. You've documented everything, right? Every interaction, every email, every letter. Good, keep doing that. And Ethan, don't pay that fine. Not a penny. That same afternoon, I got a call from Emily while I was at work. She was crying. Ethan, you need to come home. Someone vandalized the fence. I left the office immediately and drove home faster than I probably should have. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see what Emily was talking about. Someone had spray-painted "thief" in large red letters across multiple sections of my new fence. They had also poured some kind of motor oil or tar along the base, creating a disgusting mess. I walked around the property, documenting everything with my phone camera. Emily stood on the back patio, her arms wrapped around herself. Who would do this? She asked. I have a pretty good idea, I said grimly, but I need proof. I called the Scottsdale Police non-emergency line and filed a vandalism report. A different officer showed up about an hour later, took photos, and wrote up a report. When I mentioned the ongoing dispute with the HOA, the officer, a young woman named Torres, raised her eyebrows. You think your HOA president did this? I think someone connected to the HOA did it. Can you check if any of my neighbors have security cameras that might have caught something? Officer Torres said she'd ask around, and true to her word, she went door to door on our street. Most people didn't have cameras, but the house directly behind mine, which technically faced the next street over, had a camera system that covered their backyard. The homeowner, a tech guy named Derek, was happy to help. Derek pulled up his footage from the night before, and there, clear as day at around 2 in the morning, was Karen Daniels climbing over my fence with a can of spray paint in her hand. The camera caught her painting the word thief and then pouring something from a plastic container along the base of the fence. She was wearing dark clothes, but her face was clearly visible in the infrared camera when she looked around nervously. "I'll be damned," Officer Torres said. "That's your HOA vice president?" "Sure is," I confirmed. Torres took a copy of the footage and said she'd be following up with Karen. I thanked Derek profusely for his help, and he just shrugged. "HOAs are crazy," he said. "Glad I could help take one of them down a peg." 2 days later, Karen Daniels was arrested and charged with criminal damage and trespassing. According to the police report, which became public record, she confessed almost immediately and claimed she was just trying to protect community values, and that I had forced her hand by refusing to follow HOA rules. The damage to my fence was estimated at over $2,000, pushing the charge up to a Class 5 felony. The arrest made the local news. Not the big stations, but the community news websites picked it up, and suddenly everyone in Scottsdale knew about the Saguaro Heights HOA vice president who had been arrested for vandalizing a homeowner's fence. The comments sections were brutal, with most people siding with me and calling out the HOA for overreach. Patricia, unsurprisingly, tried to distance herself and the HOA from Karen's actions. She sent out an email to all residents stating that Karen had acted independently and without board approval, and that her actions do not reflect the values of the Saguaro Heights HOA. The email also mentioned that Karen had resigned from her position on the board, effective immediately. But Patricia wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. The following week, I received a letter from a law firm representing the HOA. It was a cease and desist letter demanding that I remove the fence within 10 days or face a lawsuit for encroachment on community property, violation of HOA covenants, and diminishment of community property values. The letter also demanded payment of the accumulated fines, which had now reached $7,000. Marcus read the letter and laughed. Actually laughed. "They're bluffing," he said. "They know they don't have a case. This is intimidation, plain and simple. Let me respond to this." Marcus sent back a letter that was, in his words, professional but pointed. It stated clearly that I had acted entirely within my legal rights, that the survey proved the land was mine, that all proper permits had been obtained, and that any attempt to sue would be met with a vigorous defense and a countersuit for harassment, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He also mentioned Karen's arrest and suggested that the HOA might want to reconsider its aggressive approach before more board members found themselves in legal trouble. I didn't hear anything back for about 2 weeks. During that time, Emily and I cleaned up the vandalism on the fence. It took several attempts to get the spray paint off, and we ended up having to restain those sections, but eventually, it looked good as new. Derek's security footage had been worth its weight in gold, and I made sure to send him a nice gift basket as thanks. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Patricia showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening with a camera crew. Not a news crew, but someone with a professional-looking camera and a guy holding a boom microphone. "Mr. Xavier, we're documenting the damage you've caused to community property," Patricia announced. "This footage will be used as evidence in our lawsuit against you." I looked at the camera and then back at Patricia. "You can document whatever you want, but you're not coming on my property to do it. We don't need to be on your property. The damage is visible from the street." She and her camera crew walked around to the side of my house where the fence line was visible. They stood on the community property, or what Patricia insisted was community property, and filmed the fence while Patricia narrated about how I had stolen land and destroyed community green space. Emily watched from inside, shaking her head. "She's lost her mind," she said. "Completely," I agreed. The video ended up on YouTube and the neighborhood Facebook group. Patricia had titled it HOA Property Theft, One Homeowner's Disregard for Community Values. In the video, she walked along the fence line, gesturing dramatically and explaining how I had illegally seized 3 feet of community property and erected a hostile barrier that destroyed the open, friendly atmosphere of Saguaro Heights. The video got a lot of views, but not for the reasons Patricia probably wanted. The comments were overwhelmingly negative toward her. People called her out for harassment, pointed out that property lines are legal matters not subject to HOA opinion, and several commenters shared their own HOA horror stories. A few people even started calling her Crazy Patricia and turned the video into a meme. One commenter, who claimed to be a property attorney in Arizona, wrote a long explanation of property law, survey requirements, and HOA limitations. They pointed out that even if an HOA maintains property for years, it doesn't give them ownership rights unless they can prove adverse possession, which requires exclusive, hostile, open, and continuous possession for at least 10 years with payment of property taxes. Since the land had never been separately taxed as HOA property and was part of my deeded lot, the HOA had no claim whatsoever. Marcus saw the video and called me immediately. "Ethan, this is gold. She's publicly defaming you and making provably false statements. We can use this. Use it how? If they actually file their lawsuit, this video shows a pattern of harassment and demonstrates that their claims are baseless. It actually helps your case." The lawsuit came 3 weeks later. The HOA, represented by their attorney, filed a complaint in Maricopa County Superior Court alleging encroachment, violation of HOA covenants, and seeking both injunctive relief, ordering me to remove the fence, and monetary damages for loss of property value and attorney's fees. They were asking for $50,000 plus the cost of fence removal. Marcus filed our response 2 weeks later, denying all allegations and filing a counterclaim for harassment, abuse of process, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation based on Patricia's video. We were asking for $100,000 in damages plus attorney's fees. "Now it gets interesting," Marcus told me. "Discovery is going to be fun. We get to request all their documents, all their communications about you, everything. I have a feeling we're going to find some very interesting things." He was right. During discovery, we obtained copies of all the HOA board meeting minutes, emails between board members, and financial records. What we found was damning. First, the HOA had never actually owned the disputed property. When the neighborhood was originally developed in 1998, the developer had sold individual lots with clear boundaries. The assumption that the land was community property had started with a former board president in 2005, who had simply declared it so without any legal basis. The HOA had been maintaining it, but maintaining something doesn't make it yours. Second, the emails between Patricia and other board members revealed that she knew the land was probably not HOA property, but wanted to fight me anyway to set an example and maintain control over the neighborhood. One email from Patricia to Karen, sent before Karen's arrest, literally said, "We can't let him win this. If one homeowner successfully defies us, others will follow and we'll lose all authority." Third, and most interesting, the HOA's own attorney had advised them not to pursue the lawsuit. In an email dated 2 days before they filed, their attorney had written. Based on the survey and deed provided by Mr. Xavier, I do not believe the HOA has a valid claim to this property. I strongly advise against filing suit as it will likely result in a loss and expose the HOA to a countersuit. I recommend dropping the matter entirely. Patricia had responded. We're not paying you to give up. File the suit or we'll find another attorney. They had found another attorney, a guy named Richard Wolfe, who apparently specialized in aggressive litigation and didn't seem to care much about whether his clients had valid claims. Marcus was practically giddy when he showed me the documents. This is a slam dunk. They knew they had no case. They were explicitly advised not to sue, and they did it anyway purely to harass you. The judge is going to roast them. The case moved slowly through the court system, as these things do. We had a preliminary hearing in September where the judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Sandra Reeves, listened to both sides, present their arguments. Wolfe, the HOA's attorney, argued that regardless of the technical property line, the HOA had maintained the land for years and that residents had relied on it as community property. Judge Reeves interrupted him. Counsel, are you arguing adverse possession? Wolfe hesitated. We're arguing that practical reality should be considered alongside technical legal boundaries. That's not a thing, Judge Reeves said flatly. Either you have a legal claim to the property or you don't. Do you have any evidence, any documentation at all, showing that the HOA legally owns the disputed land? We have maintained it for over 15 years, Your Honor. That's not what I asked. Do you have a deed, a title, a transfer document, anything showing ownership? Wolfe shuffled his papers. No, Your Honor, but the community has always treated it as common property. Judge Reeves looked over at Marcus. Does the defendant have documentation of ownership? Marcus stood. Yes, Your Honor. We have the original deed from the developer, a recent professional survey confirming the boundaries, and title insurance covering the entire property, including the disputed area. We also have all city permits for the fence construction. And does the plaintiff dispute the validity of these documents? Marcus smiled. They've provided no evidence contradicting them, Your Honor. They simply disagree with what the legal property line is based on no documentation whatsoever. Judge Reeves sat back in her chair. This seems fairly straightforward. Mr. Wolfe, unless you have something concrete to present, I'm inclined to grant summary judgment for the defendant. The preliminary hearing ended with Judge Reeves ordering both sides to attempt mediation before the full trial. The mediation was scheduled for early November and was held in a conference room at the courthouse. Patricia showed up with Wolfe and 2 other board members I didn't recognize. Emily came with me for moral support, and Marcus brought an associate to take notes. The mediator, a retired judge named Thomas Brennan, went through the standard introduction about how mediation works, and then asked both sides to explain their positions. Patricia went first, launching into a 15-minute speech about community values, neighborhood harmony, and how my selfish actions had torn apart the fabric of Saguaro Heights. She claimed that multiple residents had complained about the fence, that property values were declining because of it, and that I had shown complete disregard for the community. When she finally finished, Judge Brennan turned to me. Mr. Xavier, your response. I built a fence on my property with proper permits after having a professional survey done to confirm the exact property line. The HOA disagreed with the survey based on no evidence and has harassed me ever since. Their vice president vandalized my fence and was arrested for it. I just want to be left alone. Judge Brennan looked at the documents both sides had provided. After several minutes of silence, he looked up at Patricia and Wolfe. I'm going to be very direct here, You have no case. None. Mr. Xavier has clear documentation proving ownership, and you have nothing but assumptions and tradition. If this goes to trial, you will lose, and given the evidence of harassment and the fact that you were advised not to file this suit, you'll likely face significant damages on the counterclaim. Patricia's face was turning red again. But he stole community property. He did not. It was never community property. It's been his property since he bought the house, and it was the previous owner's property before that, going back to when the development was built. The fact that your HOA mistakenly treated it as common space doesn't change the legal reality. This is outrageous, Patricia said, standing up. We will not back down. We will take this to trial. Wolf put a hand on her arm. Patricia, perhaps we should consider. No. I will not let this man destroy our community. We're going to trial. Judge Brennan sighed. That's your right, of course, but I want to be clear. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that you will lose. You'll waste HOA funds on a losing case, and you'll end up owing Mr. Xavier a substantial amount of money. I strongly encourage you to reconsider. The mediation ended without any agreement. Patricia stormed out, and Wolf followed her looking deeply uncomfortable. Marcus turned to me with a grin. Well, that went well. She's not going to give up, is she? Nope. Which means we get to take this to trial and absolutely destroy their case, and then collect on our counterclaim. The trial was scheduled for January. Over the holidays, I tried to forget about the whole situation and just enjoy time with Emily and our families. But every time I looked at my fence, I was reminded of the absurdity of the situation. I had built a fence on my own property, done everything legally and correctly, and yet here I was facing a lawsuit and months of stress. In early December, something unexpected happened. I started receiving visits from other neighbors who were fed up with the HOA. George, the older gentleman who had supported me from the beginning, organized a small group of homeowners who were tired of Patricia's authoritarian approach. We've been talking, George explained one evening when the group gathered in my living room. There were 8 of us total. Patricia has been abusing her power for years. Your situation just brought it all to a head. Did you know she fined the Johnsons $2,000 because their Christmas lights were up 3 days past the allowed date? A woman named Susan spoke up. She threatened to foreclose on my house because I planted rose bushes without approval. Rose bushes? In my own front yard, another neighbor, Michael, added. She's been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses. I've seen the budget reports. There are charges for meals, spa visits, even a vacation that she claimed was an HOA conference, but there's no record of any conference. I looked at Marcus, who had joined us. Is that legal? Absolutely not. If she's misusing HOA funds, that's embezzlement, but you'd need proof. George pulled out a folder. We have proof. Michael here is an accountant. He's been going through the HOA financial records that are supposedly available to all homeowners. Patricia's been very creative with her expense reports, but the numbers don't lie. Michael opened his laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet. Over the past 3 years, Patricia has charged the HOA over $40,000 in questionable expenses. Some are clearly personal, like spa treatments and dinners at expensive restaurants with no business purpose. Others are inflated, like this HOA conference in Sedona that cost $6,000, but the conference registration was only $400. Where did the rest go? Marcus leaned forward, studying the spreadsheet. This is serious. If you can prove she's been embezzling HOA funds, she could face criminal charges. What do we need to do? Susan asked. File a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They oversee HOA compliance. Also file a police report for embezzlement. And you should probably call an emergency meeting of the HOA membership to remove her from the board. Over the next 2 weeks, the group got organized. They filed complaints with the state, filed a police report with Scottsdale PD, and called for a special meeting of the HOA membership to vote on removing Patricia and the remaining board members who had enabled her. The meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in early January at the community center. The room was packed with residents, most of whom I had never seen at HOA meetings before. Patricia sat at the front table, looking defiant. When George stood up to present the motion to remove her, she tried to rule him out of order. "You can't just remove board members without cause," Patricia said. "We have cause," George replied calmly. "Misuse of HOA funds, harassment of homeowners, and bringing a frivolous lawsuit that's costing the association thousands of dollars in legal fees." He proceeded to present the evidence Michael had compiled, projecting the spreadsheet onto a screen so everyone could see. The room erupted in angry murmurs as people saw how their HOA dues had been spent. Patricia tried to defend herself, claiming every expense was legitimate and necessary, but no one was buying it. The vote was held, and it wasn't even close. Patricia and the 2 remaining board members who had supported her were removed by a vote of 142 to 11. A new interim board was elected immediately, with George as president and Michael as treasurer. One of the first acts of the new board was to withdraw the lawsuit against me. Wolf received a letter from the HOA's new attorney, instructing him to file a notice of dismissal with the court. The lawsuit was dropped with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be refiled, but that wasn't the end of Patricia's troubles. The police investigation into embezzlement moved forward, and in late January, Patricia was arrested and charged with multiple counts of theft and fraudulent schemes. The total amount she had allegedly taken from the HOA was over $50,000 when investigators dug deeper and found additional questionable expenses going back 5 years. The local news picked up the story this time, and it made for juicy headlines. HOA president arrested for embezzlement after homeowner fence dispute exposes corruption. The story detailed how my fence had sparked a chain of events that led to the exposure of Patricia's financial misdeeds. Karen, who was still dealing with her own criminal case from vandalizing my fence, ended up pleading guilty to criminal damage as part of a plea agreement. She was sentenced to probation, community service, and ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my fence. In her statement to the judge, she apologized and said she had been unduly influenced by Patricia and had made a terrible mistake. Patricia's case went to trial in March. I attended part of it, curious to see how it would play out. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of financial misconduct. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she had simply made accounting errors and hadn't intended to steal anything, but the evidence was too clear. The jury found her guilty on all counts. Sentencing came in April. Judge Harold Chen, who heard the criminal case, was not sympathetic. He sentenced Patricia to 3 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA plus fines and court costs. In his sentencing statement, Judge Chen said, "You abused a position of trust in your community. You used your authority to harass a homeowner who was exercising his legal rights, and you stole from your neighbors to fund a lavish lifestyle. This kind of corruption in HOA leadership cannot be tolerated." As for my counterclaim against the HOA, the new board approached Marcus about settling. They acknowledged that Patricia had acted improperly, that the lawsuit should never have been filed, and that I had been subjected to harassment. We settled for $75,000, which covered all my legal fees, the cost of the survey, the fence, repairing the vandalism, and additional damages for the stress and harassment. The new HOA board also passed several reforms. They implemented strict financial controls with regular audits, limited the board's ability to fine homeowners without clear violations, and established a more transparent approval process for home improvements. George turned out to be an excellent president, focused on actually maintaining the community rather than controlling every aspect of residents' lives. My fence stayed exactly where it was, on my property line, looking beautiful. Emily and I had several neighbors tell us they appreciated that we had stood up to Patricia and inadvertently exposed the corruption that had been plaguing the HOA for years. One evening in May, I was sitting on my back patio, enjoying the Arizona sunset and looking at the fence that had caused so much trouble. Emily came out and sat next to me. "Was it worth it?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. The stress, the legal battles, the harassment, all of it had been exhausting. But we had stood up for our rights, exposed corruption, and helped reform an HOA that had been making people's lives miserable for years. "Yeah," I said. "It was worth it." "Good," Emily said. "Because I've been thinking about building a pergola out here, and I'm pretty sure we'll need HOA approval." I laughed. "With George running things, I don't think that'll be a problem." She was right. We submitted an application for the pergola, and it was approved within 2 weeks with a friendly note from George saying it would look great. The new HOA was everything the old one should have been: helpful, reasonable, and focused on actually supporting the community rather than controlling it. I ran into Wolf, Patricia's former attorney, at a coffee shop in late May. He recognized me and came over to apologize. "I should have refused to file that lawsuit," he said. "I knew it was a loser from the start, but Patricia was insistent and I let her talk me into it." "I'm sorry you had to go through all that." "Why did you take the case if you knew it was bad?" I asked. Wolf sighed. "Honestly, money. She was paying well, and I convinced myself that every client deserves representation. But there's a difference between zealous advocacy and filing frivolous suits. I learned my lesson." I nodded. "For what it's worth, you were a lot more reasonable during the proceedings than I expected." "Small consolation," Wolf said, "but I appreciate you saying it." "For what it's worth, your attorney Marcus is very good." He ran circles around me. That summer, the neighborhood had a block party, something that hadn't happened in years because Patricia had always refused to approve it, citing insurance concerns and liability issues. The new board organized it, and it was a huge success. Families came out, kids played in the streets, and people actually talked to each other like neighbors should. George gave a short speech thanking everyone for coming and talking about the new direction for the HOA. He mentioned, without naming me, that sometimes it takes one person standing up for what's right to spark positive change. People applauded, and several neighbors came up to me afterward to thank me again. Derek, my neighbor with the security camera, brought his family over to meet Emily and me. "You know, that footage from my camera has been played in court twice now," he said with a grin. "I never thought my home security system would be used to take down an HOA president." "Best investment you ever made," I joked. "Seriously, though, thank you for standing your ground." Patricia tried to fine me once for having my garbage cans visible from the street for longer than allowed. I was on vacation, and I didn't have anyone to bring them in. She wanted to charge me $50 a day. The new board dropped all those old fines. As the party wound down and the sun set over the Arizona desert, I stood in my backyard looking at my fence. It was just a fence, 6 feet of cedar planks, but it represented something more. It represented the right to use your own property as you see fit. the importance of standing up to bullies even when they have institutional power, and the reality that sometimes doing the right thing is worth the fight. The surveyor who had done my original property survey, a guy named Tom, had told me something when he gave me the results. He said that property disputes are almost never really about the property. They are about control, respect, and power. Patricia hadn't cared about 3 feet of land. She had cared about maintaining absolute control over the neighborhood, and I had challenged that control by refusing to accept her version of reality when I had the legal documents proving otherwise. In the end, the truth had won. The survey had backed me 100%, exactly as Tom had said it would. The courts had upheld my rights. Patricia had faced justice for her crimes, and the neighborhood was better off without her authoritarian rule. I learned several important lessons from the whole experience. First, always get a survey before doing any property line work. That survey had been worth every penny of the $2,000 I paid for it. Second, document everything when dealing with difficult people or organizations. Every email, every letter, every interaction I had documented had helped my case. Third, know your rights and stand up for them, even when it's hard and even when people with perceived authority tell you you're wrong. And fourth, sometimes the best thing you can do for a community is to stand up to the people who are abusing their power within it. The HOA sent me a formal letter of apology in June, signed by all 5 new board members. It acknowledged that I had been treated unfairly, that the previous board had acted improperly, and that they hoped we could move forward with a better relationship. It was a classy gesture, and I appreciated it. Marcus sent me a final bill for his services in July, which was completely covered by the settlement. He included a note that said, "Congratulations on winning your case and taking down a corrupt HOA president. If you ever need legal services again, I hope it's for something boring like updating your will." Patricia, meanwhile, was in the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville, serving her 3-year sentence. According to news reports, she was appealing her conviction, but legal experts said she had virtually no chance of success given the overwhelming evidence against her. Karen had completed her community service and was reportedly keeping a very low profile. As for me, I went back to my normal life. I worked my job, spent time with Emily, and enjoyed my house and my fence. The pergola we built turned out great, providing nice shade over the patio. We planted some climbing jasmine that would eventually grow up the posts, and Emily hung string lights that gave the whole space a cozy feel in the evenings. Sometimes people who heard about my story would ask if I regretted the whole thing, if I wished I had just given in to Patricia and avoided all the drama. The answer was always no. Standing up to bullies is never easy, but it's always worth it. And in this case, standing up to Patricia had not only protected my property rights, but had helped expose corruption, and led to positive reforms that benefited the entire neighborhood. The fence stood strong and straight along my property line, exactly where the survey said it should be. Every time I looked at it, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because I had won some battle, but because I had stood up for what was right, followed the law, and in the process, had helped make my community a better place. In August, I received an unexpected phone call from a reporter at a Phoenix newspaper who wanted to do a story about HOA reform in Arizona. Apparently, my case had become somewhat well known in legal circles as an example of HOA overreach and the importance of property surveys. I agreed to be interviewed, though I kept the focus on the broader issues rather than on Patricia personally. The article ran in September and sparked some discussion about HOA regulations in Arizona. Several state legislators expressed interest in reform legislation that would provide more protections for homeowners and more oversight of HOA boards. I testified at a committee hearing in October, explaining my experience and advocating for stronger safeguards against HOA abuse. The experience taught me that individual actions can sometimes have broader impacts than you expect. I had just wanted to build a fence on my property, but that simple act had exposed corruption, led to criminal prosecutions, sparked HOA reform in my neighborhood, and contributed to a statewide conversation about HOA regulations. By the time winter rolled around again, more than a year after I had first marked out my property line, things had settled into a comfortable normal. The HOA under George's leadership was functioning well. Property values in Xavier Heights had actually increased slightly, contrary to Patricia's predictions. Neighbors were happier without the constant threat of fines and harassment for minor violations. Emily and I hosted Thanksgiving that year, and several of our neighbors came over. George brought his famous pecan pie, Susan brought a green bean casserole, and Derek brought his kids who played in our backyard, running along the fence line that had caused so much trouble. Watching those kids play, I realized that the fence had become just what it was supposed to be, a simple property boundary, nothing more, nothing less. I never saw Patricia again after her sentencing. Her house was eventually sold, reportedly to help pay the restitution she owed. A nice young couple with a baby moved in, and they were delightful neighbors. They had heard the story about the fence, of course. Everyone in the neighborhood knew about it by then, and they thought it was hilarious that such a simple thing had led to so much drama. Marcus and I stayed in touch, occasionally meeting for lunch to talk about legal matters and life in general. He told me he had turned down several potential HOA cases that reminded him too much of Patricia's frivolous lawsuit. "Life's too short to fight stupid battles," he said. "But fighting for someone who's in the right, that's always worthwhile." The lessons I learned from the fence saga stayed with me. I became more involved in the HOA, attending meetings regularly and serving on the Architectural Review Committee. I wanted to make sure that we continued to operate fairly and reasonably, that we didn't slip back into the authoritarian patterns of the Patricia era. George appreciated the help, and together with the other board members and engaged homeowners, we built an HOA that actually served the community rather than ruling over it. Looking back on everything, from that first morning when I hammered in the survey stakes to the final resolution and beyond, I realized that the whole experience, as stressful as it had been, had taught me something important about standing up for what's right. It's easy to give in when someone with authority, even perceived authority, tells you you're wrong. It's easy to back down when faced with threats of fines, lawsuits, and community ostracism. But sometimes, when you know you're right and you have the documentation to prove it, you have to stand firm. My fence was still there, straight and true along the property line, exactly where the survey had said it should be. It would probably stand for 20 years or more, a quiet reminder of the principle that property rights matter, that truth matters, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply stand your ground and insist on what's right. And every time I sat on my patio under the pergola, looking at that fence in the glow of the string lights, with Emily beside me and our neighbors occasionally stopping by to chat, I knew that every bit of the struggle had been worth it. Not just for me, but for everyone in Xavier Heights who could now live in their homes without fear of arbitrary rules and harassment from a power-hungry HOA president. The fence still stood as a testament to a simple truth. When you're right, when you have the documentation to prove it, and when you're willing to stand up for yourself, justice will prevail. It might take time, it might take effort, and it might take some battles along the way, but in the end, truth and law will win out over bluster and bullying every single time.